All right, fellas, here we are, early November, basically a rut hunt down in a funnel area with a food source bumped up tight to heavy cover and over a decoy. And this deer basically read the script. It was an awesome hunt. I was happy to be a part of it. And it's just really, really cool when you get to experience Missouri in November.
And yeah, anywhere in the Midwest in November, but you've got the like recipe for success here. You're like, I'm going tight to cover. I'm on a food source and a bottleneck, and I have a decoy. So that time of the year, we're kind of, it's debatable, but probably just a few days before peak breeding or the lockdown phase that we would say. And so anytime, to me, it's like a magnet pulling me to dense cover when we get closer and closer to lockdown or peak breeding. It's like I got to get closer and closer and closer. So that's what you guys are doing.
That's what I love about this set. I mean, historically, this thing has been so productive for you, and it's almost like just that solid go-to. What time of the year it is? Yep, we're heading there because of the attributes of it. But, it's close to the dense cover, but it's also on a giant artery or travel corridor with the creek system. And so not only like resident deer that are core area right there, hug tight with the dense cover, if you do get those deer that are traveling, they're up and down that corridor too. So it's kind of like you're not hunting geese and ducks on a migrating pattern, but kind of set up similar, like, hey, if something is traveling through, we got an opportunity to pull that in a track too.
Yep. And it's been probably over a decade ago that we put that plot there, and I used to hunt off a tree stand.
Mm-hmm.
And what we found out was they were constantly going through there, but they weren't slowing down.
Gotcha.
So what we ended up doing is putting that, I don't know, what is it, an acre and a half or so, 2-acre food plot down there. So one, it kind of became a destination, but also it's in that transition zone to slow them down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then when these does are coming through that transition, they're now stopping, feeding for 15, 20 minutes, whatever the case may be. Now all of a sudden these bucks come through there, we're holding them there longer, and we throw the decoy in the mix. Now it's going to bring them in bow range.
Yeah. I mean, look at the map. You can see we've got the food plot that, right there in that valley. It's 2.46 acres, so 2.5 acres. And you look, and you can see the little creek just south of there kind of meandering through the valley. And you look around it, and you can see dense pockets of cedars. You can see, knowing the part of the state that we're in next to a creek, we know there's a lot of willows. There's a lot of young riparian area shrubs. You add in some dense cuttings around that with the chainsaw to where, okay, we just make this corridor as thick and gnarly as possible to where we're checking a lot of boxes when it comes to dense cover. You got great access from the north rolling in out of that prairie restoration area. So you're down you're just kind of like I referenced in past videos. We're going right to the edge of the fence. We're peeking over. It's like we're right in their bedroom, but we're not getting fully exposed.
I think we could talk about the size of this plot a lot because, you think of 2.5 acres, you guys are bow hunting it. Not every deer that steps in is going to automatically be within range, right? So there's a trade-off, though, to have enough forage that when you have dense pockets of cover, that you got enough forage to last you through this time of the year. And then what crop is planted here, too, because if you have fall annuals and it's dry and you have a lot of deer on it, you may not have great forage going into this time of the year. But perennial crop, clover base, right? So it can handle the heat of the browse pressure. And when you have that much forage right there, you can hold a lot of deer around it. So there's so many elements to, okay, yeah, it's a little bit larger, but the trade-off is now you bring the decoy in, and it's this time of the year. You got some deer with some attitude as they're walking and cruising. And I think that's exactly what this deer does. I mean, he steps out to the field and just commits. He's like, I know what I'm going to do when I see that decoy.
You guys put this plot in years ago, and how many different types of crop have you planted? Have you ever tried soybeans or anything like that?
No.
Because you know that it's going to be failure.
Yeah, no doubt.
It's gonna be
2.5
overbrowsed.
acres, that tight to bedding down there where they're comfortable it would be
It'd
demolished.
never make it.
Yeah.
It wouldn't make it. That's
No.
right. Yeah. So knowing what to plant is, how many times do we see guys with failed food plots? And you can chalk it up for all kinds of different stuff. But in this day and age, high deer populations is very common.
It's a common culprit of failed food plots.
No doubt.
And so you got to go with something that can withstand that, and that being close.
Well, it's a prime example. Every time we're down there, we always debate, are we going to go there for an all-day sit?
Mm.
Yeah.
Because the transition happens sunrise to sunset. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't know if you're going to see one at 8 a.m. or 4:30. Could be at 2. You just don't know, and that's the beauty about this plot is if you're going to go down there, it's not a bad idea to ride that plot the entire day, just because the transition never seems to stop
Sure.
that time of year.
Yeah, and with it being so close to the cover, the doe family groups are bedded up all around this thing. So that's what makes it so good all day is those does and fawns, and they're bedded right there. They're getting up and stepping out for a bite.
Yeah.
So, to your point, to plant soybeans on a 2.5 acre plot or something that can get browsed off when you've got between 10 to 15 different family groups feeding on it on a consistent basis all through the day, not just morning and evening, not just for an hour before dark, but like all throughout the day the place gets hit. And that's when it comes November, those bucks know that, and they're cruising for that and scent checking it. And the moment they catch something, they step out in the plot. You can see by the map, it's kind of like X marks the spot there where the blind is. You've got, the drainage running to the north of the blind and then the tree line west to east. So it's
And then you've got the
designed-
creek to the south, which then
creek to the south.
creates another pinch point to
Yes.
force them out into that plot, or at least make them take a look because they're so close.
And we're talking about a creek in northern Missouri, so we know
High
erosion, high banks,
high
lots
banks.
of deer do not just
There's
jump
only
in
a
and out of
speci-
those creeks.
There's only a specific couple places probably where they can cross
Yep.
that creek.
That's correct.
Coming from the south, headed to the north. So, it really bottlenecks a lot of things down
One
there.
thing you mentioned, Casey, that I think a lot of people can learn from is how do you know you have a food plot close to dense cover? Maybe I'm not good at identifying dense cover, but when I think a good indication that deer are bedded close by is a lot of daylight activity from other older age class deer. It could even be older does that are living on that property. You've seen them, distinguishing marks or whatever it may be, and say, okay, those does are comfortable in the middle of the day on this plot. And then I can get some older age class bucks on daylight. That, to me, is a pretty good indication that we have bedding close by.
No doubt. In this particular situation with the way we were hunting it, we encountered this deer the morning prior.
Right.
Yeah.
And almost had got it done that day. And in this situation, a doe, as he was approaching the decoy, a doe came out from the inside corner, which is east of our blind, but to your left as you're facing south.
Yeah.
So it all came together there, and a lot of the deer come out from that inside corner. It's designed to be able to harvest animals without a decoy.
Yeah.
The issue is we're trying to shrink that plot down as best we can for those bucks that are cruising and just poking their head out, checking, are there any does out here? That visualization really has benefited us.
And a buck cruising, right? We always say, hey, he's using his nose to cruise and the wind and everything. Yeah, but if he's got an opening and he knows there's a ton of does during daylight that utilize it, he's going to go visually put eyeballs on it.
100%.
And when you have a decoy out there, it presents that opportunity to challenge. And a lot of times we see what happens.
I think the other point that's so interesting is we were there 3 days in a row.
Yeah, I think so.
So which compounds into what we talk about all the time, exit and entry, right?
Yes.
So we wouldn't be able to pull this off if our exit and entry was weak.
Yep.
Knowing that we had so much transition and activity, we saw that deer the day before. His mood was not ready to be decoyed. It's funny how 12 hours can change like that, and all of a sudden attitude changes, whatever it may be.
Demeanor.
Same location, same field, same deer. 24 hours later, now all of a sudden he's within bow range.
Yeah.
Don't give up on a spot that produces with transitions, with does that the transition is even if he doesn't decoy the day before or 72 hours before, that doesn't mean he's not going to do it the following
a great
day.
point. I think a lot of people will probably get discouraged if they're new to decoy and say, well, that he didn't work. We didn't get the
He
yield
might
the
tomorrow.
response out of
He
him.
might
Right.
tomorrow.
It's all about that different attitude. What scenario he just came from, what other scent that he just had from another buck in the area, that doe popping out in that inside corner. What's kind of, I guess, comical as we're talking about this plot itself. I think as hunters we always like to categorize like an area. Oh, well, that's a pinch point set. That's a kill plot, or that's a destination food plot. This is like everything. When you kind of like look at all the attributes of it, it's like there's almost something that it's not, right? Like it has so many different features to it that make it just a dynamite location, but it has so many great factors to it. You're like, man, I can hunt that all the time. You can probably hunt it early season.
Well,
late
you
season,
can as long as you have good exit and entry. So,
Yep.
I think Casey talked about on a few episodes earlier about if you see the amount of activity diminishing every time you go in, it's probably you because you're the only variable.
So how do you guys determine if you're going to set all day or not in this location?
That time of year, it's more often than not that we do.
Yeah.
That time of year, more
And
often than not, we do.
rely on trail pictures and also the sit. Let the, a lot of times we talk about like, well, we'll let the sit dictate.
True.
If you're in there and you see your target deer at 10 o'clock, it's hard to just duck out of there and move on. But, this particular location, if we wanted to, we could do it from November 1st through the 15th.
For sure.
And you could camp out down there. You really could. And you'd have great movement.
We've harvested deer from right at daybreak to right at dusk.
Anywhere in between.
Anywhere between.
And that's something I think we should talk about as well, which is a lot of people might shy away from hunting a food plot in the morning. It's not usually a strategy you talk about just because you're going to maybe bump deer or whatever. Well, in this specific location, we rarely have deer in there when we're on our way in. These deer are on their destination food sources, cruising, and they're moving towards bedding. So they really don't hit this food source heavy until 8, 9 o'clock. A lot of times we'll sit there for a couple hours before we see our first deer.
Before they start filtering back in.
That's right, which is really cool because something people don't normally experience. You think about hunting a food plot in the morning, and you're like,
and your
really
access
bad
is
idea.
still good though. It's not like you can blow them out. Like
Exactly.
There's that big ditch you crawl through to get into the blind, and then once you get into the blind, that's when it's like, oh, here's our first real look at the food plot.
Yeah,
Right.
It's got cedar trees in front of it growing up, so
Yeah.
you can't see us get to the base of it. It's made for that, to be able to sneak into it. But
I think one of the biggest bullet points that I've learned on this particular plot is the fact that it was a true transition zone. I was very hesitant about putting a plot there.
You just wanted it to be a really
I
good
just wanted to
transition.
be a transition zone.
Yeah.
And once we decided to go into that, it was one of the best decisions we obviously have created. And I think that's one message, for everybody watching is if you've got a really good transition zone and it's flat and you can get, a half acre or an acre put into that, it's going to increase your activity, your experience, and slow them down by a factor of 100.
Yeah, as long as you're not removing that quality cover and diminishing
Correct.
the cover around
or clean it out and then work on the edges.
Sure.
And start doing
Build back more cover.
build
around
it back around the edges, and then you haven't lost anything.
Bingo.
That's a point I wanted to add. When you look at the map, you can see where the food plot sits, and then just west, you can see heavy cedars, which is probably what the actual food plot location looked like pre-thinning it.
It was.
And I think you would be tempted to go, let's just go ahead and make it bigger. That way we can have food. Well, then that may take away the benefit to that area being very secluded. It feels like a little nook and cranny where the deer can go in there to grab a bite and move out, rather than having a 5-acre field where it's like, okay, this doesn't feel like the bedroom that it used to be.
I like the close quarters. They feel comfortable. They're not too terribly far from that dense cover. That's only going to increase that daylight activity.
Exactly.
You could have easily gone too big, but you kept it the right appropriate size to feed them, but to still kill them.
Yeah, it's funny because Derek, we started taking him when he was 9, and now he's 20. And when we go to Missouri, he always says, "We go on the Big Cedar."
Oh yeah, every time.
Every time. And
It's automatic.
It's because what we've done over the years. I don't want to say it's a slam dunk, but there's a lot of activity. It's constantly you're in it. You never feel like you're out of the game there, and that says a lot when you've got a youth hunter who's now 20 years old that says that's my spot.
I think there's so many phrases, and everyone's heard it who's listening. But like the first time in is always your best set, and like don't pressure it too much. But there's been several different hunts this season so far, and I know there's more to come and we're going to see, I think, probably another harvest from this location later in the season. But I'm of the kind of the complete opposite side of things. When you have a good spot and you can get to it, I'd rather hunt the heck out of it, because there's no point in going to places where the deer, your target deer aren't at to hunt. But if it's a clean, good entry exit and they're there and you have time, put the time in, because then you're going to kill them.
The percentages go up for sure. Yeah.
Especially that time of the year. You know, you're seeing different deer every single day. You know, it's not as if you're going in and it's early in the season, you know, you've got similar deer feeding out and then feeding back off.
Very much resident deer, right? Now, who knows what's going to show up.
Exactly, that's part of the fun of it. It's probably my favorite part about that time of the year is just, what are we going to see today?
It's one of those classic spots where we had the intel of transition, we took a good spot, and we made it better.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what this spot is.
All right, we just gave away all the details of how this hunt went down, but check out the link to see it in real time.